What's up, guys and gals? Iceman here. Welcome to Chilling Tales. So, this story, it almost pains me to bring it to you, but the stuff, of course, is important to take notes on. It's important to know the potential dangers of black bears, because I myself live in black bear country. I've seen many of them throughout my days, especially when I was a little duck. I remember seeing them hanging outside of an ice cream shop. People would feed them, these humongous bears, just massive creatures. But nonetheless, this story, it's hideous what happened to these 3 young boys. And there was another one who had to witness this scene. But nonetheless, this attack took place in Ontario, Canada. Cliffs everywhere. Wild forests. Beavers popping their heads up and down in the water, bobbling around and so forth. Pileated woodpeckers. Deer, moose, wolves. Thick, lush forests. And bears. Black bears, namely. So there was this lake where these 4 young men decided to go fishing on that fateful day. Richard, 18 years old, with his brother William, who was 16. George, who was 12, their friend down the road, and his brother, Mark, who was 14 years old. So basically, these kids were running up and down the shore of this small lake, and it had a lot of weeds about it. So they all split up to go fishing. And what happened was George ended up going out all on his own, way down the shoreline. And the other kids couldn't see him, and they started to split up as well. Mark and William stuck together, but Richard stayed in the main spot where all their tackle was and so forth. So all these kids had their separate poles. So George was standing there on the river shore, casting his bait, just waiting to catch a walleye or a catfish or a pike or whatever. These kids were sport fishermen for the most part, but they would occasionally bring some home to eat. And their parents really appreciated that. This is back in the day. This is in the 70s. But this bear was watching young George, who again was only 12 years old. This boy's eyes must have been glowing as he was watching his bobber, just waiting for that nice catch. And this bear, this black bear, was there in the thicket, witnessing the scene of this young boy, just gazing upon him with drool oozing from its mouth. Now, it's unsure exactly what went down here, but the bear began stalking these children, and it crept up to young George, and it was as though the young boy didn't even see it coming. It's likely he was facing toward the lake when this bear stood up behind him and just lunged down at him, wrapping its jaws around his neck and just twisting it and just breaking the bones, snapping the neck, probably paralyzing the child, and then dragging him into the brush. Now, I don't know if George was dead by the time the bear began ripping into him, but it didn't take long for it to temporarily evacuate the scene. Because after this, Mark and William, 16 and 14, decided to go looking for little George because they called for him and they couldn't hear anything. They could just hear the birds, the sounds of the crickets, the sounds of bugs, and they'd yell, "George, George, where are you, buddy?" There's just no response. So they knew that he walked way down the shore here. So they began scouring the area. And it seems that at this time, when they began approaching the mangled carcass of George, that the bear ventured back into the brush and vanished. So these kids just knew something was up. The birds were no longer chirping. It was just eerily silent in this devastating scene. So it was Mark who started walking toward where the carcass was. And all of a sudden, this bear charges out of the brush and does almost the same damn thing. It's really unusual to research this attack because this bear was like so predatory. They normally aren't like that, where they go for the neck right away. That's like what a cougar does or a mountain lion. Bears, they're just so robust and thick, they don't really have to do that. They can just overpower you with their weight, especially if we're talking about young children here. But this one seemed to be calculated and adamant on just methodically picking these boys off. So it barreled out of the brush and just crashed into Mark before Mark could make it to the body. And it grabbed him by the neck as well with its jaws and just twisted and yanked and buried its yellow bacteria-ridden fangs right into his flesh. And it just tore and it ripped his, the main artery right here, ripped that off. And just blood began just spewing down his chest. And the bear dragged him over near George's carcass. And that's when William knew something was up. He heard the commotion, he heard the death scene, and the bear just wasted no time. William turned and began running back down the shore toward where Richard was, who was the oldest of the children. He was 18 years old, probably the most respected, the most capable. But unfortunately, little William didn't make it far, and the bear made it to him, crashed him, just tackled him to the ground, began digging into his back, just chomping and chopping like what a pit bull does to a possum, how they just crunch. And the boy was just screaming in agony. And then it grabbed him by the thigh and dragged him over to where the other carcasses were. Now, I don't know if little George or Mark were still partly alive during this attack. It's likely they weren't entirely dead. I mean, this stuff all took place within minutes. But I just don't know. So the bear began eating these young boys, their bodies and wounds just festering, and blood and bacteria and all that. It was a moist area, you know what I mean? There was a lot of moisture in the air, and there was mosquitoes and bugs, and they were just covering the bodies, but this bear just didn't care. It would just dig right through the bodies, and that's when eventually Richard took notice that there was just nothing going on. He didn't know where the other boys went. It was silent. So he decided to investigate, and he began walking through the woods, just creeping through the thick brush. And he saw a dark black figure, just how elegantly it was able to move, just how stealthily it was able to move. That's how these things are. They're big, but they can just move just so quickly, like ninjas almost. I remember I was in Upper Canada camping a couple years ago in a cabin, and in the middle of the night, a black bear, a massive one, just passed along the porch right on the cabin. Right, there's a thin wall between me and the bear. And my dog was in bed with me, and so was my wife. And the dog just started going off in the bed because we could see through the window. We could see this shadowy figure just pass through, and it was just so quiet, but it was so large. And just watching how that thing was able to move with its size is just astonishing. and awesome, but concerning. So Richard saw this taking place, and he knew that it was going to be dangerous. He could see the carcasses of the boys, and he could see this shadowy figure. So he grabs his pole as a form of defense and runs back toward their main spot and starts heading down the trail back toward town. So somehow Richard contacted authorities. Fortunately, the bear didn't follow him. Maybe it thought that it had enough to eat. I just don't know. But the authorities showed up, and they discovered that hideous scene with little George and Mark. Their bodies were next to each other, just mangled and partly consumed. And then we had little William not far from them, half buried in a cache with shit and piss all over. I mean, this bear was ruthless. All right, and that's often how they'll disguise the scent of their kill, is they'll mark it as their own. And it scraped its ass all over the top of the ground. It was just disgusting. But the authorities took notice to this scene, and from the research I've done, I don't know if they ended up shooting this thing or not. It might have gotten away. I mean, it seems like this bear was smart and methodical, which is my concern. And it could have noticed the search party, and it just knew that it had to get out of there, that this wasn't going to be a safe situation for it, that it had these 3 boys, it had a little bit to eat, and it could probably return later, but it saw these men, so it might have vanished into the woods. But that's all I know. I mean, often this does happen, where an attack occurs, the bear gets away, and it's still out there. I mean, this is just another stark reminder as to why it's important to be cautious in bear country. It's important to have a means of protection, be it a spray can or a little boomstick. Hand cannon is what I prefer. I prefer both, the spray and the hand cannon. But nonetheless, let me know if you guys have heard of this attack, and what do you think could have been done differently? I mean, it's unfortunate that the boys had to split up the way that they did. If they all stayed together, my guess is this likely wouldn't have happened. But that's what happens just in general. People get comfortable living in bear country, and these attacks are often far and few between. But on occasion, you'll get a predatory rogue like what we've seen here, and just it becomes a massacre. But yeah, if y'all will like this video, hit the subscribe button. Become a patron if you want to support me further. Links in the description below. More videos to come. I'll see you all tomorrow. Peace be with you.